Hi, everyone. I am Kim with Abundant Life Tarot, and I'm super excited to be doing this particular presentation discussion today with you. And we are going to be discussing what's in a deck connection. Okay, connecting with your decks. How do you know when you have a strong connection before, during, and after you own a deck? Even the after is important, right? And how do you know when you have a meh or unsatisfactory or sucky connection with the deck? So we're just going to get into the minutia of deck connecting. So let me know if if you'd be so kind. Hi Scott, I'm glad you're here today. If you'd be so kind as to let me know if you can see me okay, if you can hear me okay. Just doing a little tech check. Just making sure, because sometimes it's a little sketchy. And yeah, so if all is well, I'll just proceed forward because I have quite a bit to cover. And what I will say is this: I want you all to feel free to chime in, to chat, to comment, even on the replay or after you've watched it. Oh, thank you, Scott. I appreciate you. Um, so we could just chat and keep the conversation going. This is going to be fun. With what this particular discussion is deriving from is I created a course called Choosing Your Next Deck, Curating Your Collection. It is a free course on my website at abundantlifeshop.com, and it's all about mindful and intentional collecting. It does not pass judgment on how many decks you choose to own, but it's more about you getting clear wherever you are in your collecting journey on the kind of decks you would like to add going forward, to know whether or not you are in um, a waxing phase, a waning phase of your collection. Sometimes we are growing our collection, we are adding to it. That's okay. It's great to know that you're in that season, right? That way you don't start to judge yourself or subject yourself to people judging you about your collecting habits. On the other hand, it's completely okay to feel satiated with your collection. And then finally, for those who are going through a phase of releasing their decks and not really adding to their collection. And it doesn't mean that they don't love cards, it's just that's where they're at in their collecting habits. That's okay too. So it's a fun way to connect with your collection. Oh my goodness. Hello, Neem. Thank you for joining. Hi, Vintage Moon. Thank you. So I've got a fun presentation for you guys and some interactive ways that we can work with our decks today. So let's get started. I will be sharing my screen because y'all know I like to present things. That's just me. I think you could take the girl out of the corporate life, but you can't take the corporate life out of the girl. I don't know. But I just enjoy doing this in this format. I will, because I'm going to be in a presentation mode, I'm not always able to see the chat. So I'll be sure to make moments to stop and see if there's any questions for me, any comments for me. If you do have questions or comments, please at me so I can clearly see it. I would say put it in caps, but I'll do my best and address any comments or questions that you guys have coming through. And even in the comments, because this is a part of the course, I definitely try to respond to all comments related to these type of videos. All right, so now we can get started. Yay. Now I'm going to share this screen here. Let me set it. Let me make sure I'm knowing what I'm doing here. You guys, it's so funny. Modern technology, right? So now I have to go here and here. Before I do that, I need to make sure you guys can see the presentation okay. If you can't, if you are having issues, please let me know. Choosing your next deck, curating your collection, lesson 7. So for each lesson, there are 10 lessons. The 10th one not really needing a discussion, really. That's like the conclusion lesson. But I like to do these little discussions after the fact, because after I've did the work of the course, and as people take the course and they let me know what comes up for them, I feel the need to then do a follow-up discussion or lecture to augment the course. So then I will be adding this particular live to the course for lesson 7 so other people can watch it later. I also want to thank those who have taken the course, have taken lessons from it, who've come back, who started it, who started it, didn't finish it, came back again, and those who actually have completed the course in its entirety. I'm excited about it because I finally upgraded, and that was actually a financial investment. So I'm now going to commit to making more courses. But now it allows for students to download their certificate after they complete the course. I think I've tested it for myself. I think others have also been able to download their certificates, but y'all have to let me know. It's very new and I'm very excited about it. So another thing about the course is when you take the quizzes, it allows for me to comment on, like, when you do the essay little questions, and I give feedback. I now make a point to give feedback to each student. So whatever lesson that they're on, and they're pouring their heart out sometimes, and really getting out a lot of insights on their collecting habits, I respond back. And sometimes students might even email me, and that's okay too. This is something that I love to share. I love collecting. I am a collector. I'm a tarot reader, probably first and foremost right now in my journey, but I still love collecting cards. So I always love to help folks wherever they are in that journey. Let's get started. Enough rambling. So you might see me moving around. I actually have little cue cards. Okay. All right. Let's see. What's in a deck connection? So have we actually ever really put words to what we're feeling, and when you know that you're having a great deck connection? Like, I know that there are times that I do put them in a few words when I'm talking each month about my favorites, right? I'm like, oh, I love this deck. I use it for this. I use it for that. But I never really deep dived into really what that connection is about. Signals that I actually am really bonding with the deck, and then also signals when I'm not, and what to do about that. So that's what we're doing. So let's see. So that's basically what I mentioned. How do you know when you've made a really good connection with the deck? What are some of your personal clues? And that's what we're going to discuss today. All right. So what are telltale signs you've made a solid deck connection? That's the main theme. And for those who keep their decks nearby, pull out your favorite decks and think about how you knew when this was the deck for you. Like, how did you know? Like, can you put words to it? Like, do you remember the moment? Like, I love my decks so much that it's like boyfriends for me. Okay. Boyfriends over the years, I remember. And that doesn't mean I don't love my husband any, less, but I just remember when I had love in the brain and the heart. And I have similar feelings for my decks. So yeah. So let me see here. Now, what I'm going to say is this before I move forward, before anybody starts to really dive into what we're talking about today. There are collectors who strictly collect just for the pure collector mindset. With their, they are in it to make a profit potentially for a deck sell. They are looking for rare decks. They are looking for out of print decks, sought after decks. And it has really nothing to do with a connection. It has nothing to do with spirituality. It is really dollars and cents. People can feel however they want to feel about that, but there is a prospecting market in collecting of decks. To some extent, I was going through a phase of that probably in 2018, 2019 particularly. where I was like, I really want sought after decks and decks that'll go out of print and probably not be printed again. I want to have those decks. But things shifted for me. My tastes changed. My needs as a reader changed as I started to do more professional readings. But there are people who are not really feeling what I'm going to be talking about today because they don't approach this as a spiritual venture, and that's okay. But this is for those folks who believe that they have a connection with the deck and that they're primarily using their decks for readings. Yes, to appreciate the art, of course, right? But also to feel something. This is a spiritual tool for them. So that's what I wanted to say before we go even any further than this, because I do have some people who purely in my course who purely are just wanting to know the practical ways of collecting their decks. They're not worried about a connection. So there are those folks. Now, ask your deck, the one that you pulled out, your favorite one, hopefully, what's in a deck connection for me? What are my telltale signs? And then see what your cards have to say. And I'm going to show you how I did this exercise for this presentation in a couple of slides ahead. So put in the chat, what comes up for you. Use one or two cards. I would say one card, shuffle the deck, and then whatever card jumps or whatever card you pull, that be one way. And then the next card you pull, have one card the next way. So that's how I did it. I'll show you what I did in a moment. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to hop over in a moment to make sure that you guys are good. Because got to make sure y'all are good. So the picture here is the Hoodoo Tarot by Tiana Lee McQuiller. And I put this particular deck because this was a connection that evolved over time for me. I have some decks like the Light Seers Tarot that I instantly connected with. When I first was backing out on Kickstarter, I only needed to see like 3 images, and I love Chris Ann Donnelly so much that I was like, I'm going to get that deck. And it was easy. It was an easy connection, and it proved right. I now use the mass market one all the time for professional readings. The Hoodoo Tarot was an interesting thing for me. Okay, so the connection, I heard about this deck before it became available for pre-order. And I saw a few images and I was like, yeah, I like the theme or the premise of this deck. I think it's going to be great for just me as a human being. I'm a Black woman from America. My family is from the South. And I was starting to get, feel certain things about exploring hoodoo and exploring ancestral veneration. So it was like, that makes sense to me. I don't know how I'm going to use it. We'll see how it goes. So I pre-ordered it. And I usually don't pre-order mass market decks because I like the kinks to get out. I don't like to get the first run anymore of a mass market because sometimes there's issues with it and I'd rather get the next printing. But something told me to pre-order it and I did. And then I got it. And then the deck sat for a good portion of that year. I think it was 2019 this deck came out. I can't remember. Beginning of 2019. I want to say it was like going to be a birthday gift for me. And I'm pretty sure it was 2019. But it just kind of sat. I would go through and look at the images. I read the guidebook. I was like, okay, I don't feel the call to get rid of it, but I don't feel like I'm using it either. So I just sat it on the shelf. And then I started going through this spiritual journey where my ancestors were speaking to me in my meditations that I would do, or I could hear them all the time. And I was like, wouldn't it be fun to communicate with them in a way that I can communicate, which is tarot. Talk to me all day about tarot. I talk tarot all day. So I was like, let me pull this deck out. So I started working with it and I was like, ooh, I like this deck. And so I started working with it in my spiritual practice once a week. And then I said, well, let me see if folks want to do a tarot study with it this year in 2021. And people did. And I love this deck now. The progression of our connection has been beautiful. It is deep. Now it's easy for me to really pick up this deck and feel like I know it. I love it. And it was an evolution. From the time even before it came through my door with the little Amazon package, before it even came, there was a bond being formed. And now that bond is deepened. And now it sits on my table all the time. So let's stop here for a moment before I move on to the next slide and see what we're talking about here. I don't want to try to do that and just go here. Hi, Emmy. Thank you for joining. Hello, hello. Okay, so I'm going to see what we're talking about here. Okay. It's okay, Neem, if you're just listening, that's all right. Vintage Moon, yes. She says, I'm assuming she. I love my deck so much, and that's why I can't imagine culling. It makes me sad. I'm going to put your comment up here because, yeah, I understand how you feel. I felt that way. And I still feel that way. I'm going to be honest with you. Even with culling, I'm not going to say it's always an easy process for those of us who really love our decks. And maybe that's information for you. Maybe you're just not at a point in your journey that it's time to cull. You'll know when it's time. And it won't be as painful. And it won't be as like, oh, it'll just make sense. It'll flow. It had to flow for me when I was making a big move from one country to another. It just, there's circumstances made it make sense and a little easier. My first real connection was my Hanson Roberts tarot deck. Oh, I would say my first real connection. I had the Morgan Greer and like the Rider-Waite-Smith. I had them. I really didn't make a connection with them. It was the Gilded Tarot that I actually made a real strong connection with. I don't know. It's so now far away from my aesthetic that I go for it, but I really fell in love with that deck. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Thank you. Hi, Blue Crescent Tarot. Hello. Okay. So I'm going to get back to the presentation at hand and remember that I left off at Blue Crescent Tarot. Hello. Okay, here we go. So I got it in presentation mode. Thank you. So Telltale Signs, we're going to get into that. Ways to know that you've got a great connection on your hands. So let's see. Just making sure I keep up with my notes. Okay. So I got a list. So what I did, it was like what I mentioned before, is I took out my Light Seers Tarot and I asked, give me a card for ways to know that I've got a great deck connection on my hands. So that's how this list was formed. The first one is a given. It's easy to work with this deck. It's super easy to vibe with it. It was easy connection when you first saw images of it, whether you were backing it on Kickstarter or whether you saw it in a Facebook group and you fell in love and you went over to the Instagram and you looked at the creators, little images, and you're like, oh, I fell in love and I know the theme well. I'm just going to vibe with it. And then it gets in your hot little hands and you start working with it. The readings just flow. It just feels good. You keep it on your table. You put in your bag, your backpack or whatever you carry your stuff in. It just is easy overall, just from start to finish. Everything was easy about this deck. So that's how you know. That's one way. You've bonded and it feels like an old friend. Feels like an old friend. And like, have you ever had those friendships where you just meet somebody, but you feel like you guys have known each other forever? To me, that's what I liken it to. And another example that I liken a bond to, especially for collectors of multiple decks, is a teacher, elementary school teacher or primary school teacher, and she has a classroom full of students. And throughout the school year, she, develops bonds. Some of those bonds are instant, and some of those bonds take time over the school year. But in some, she just does not bond, and there's like a problem child that you just not going to bond with. So I liken it to that. I like to think of it like my little classroom of students or my little classroom of decks, and you have varying degrees of how you bond with them. And so, yeah, like an old friend though. A lot of times I feel like they're my old friends. And that's why I said this live stream may not be for the folks who are like, I don't even look at decks like that. You feel reinvigorated after working with this deck. Like sometimes when I'm getting ready to do a day of readings, like especially like on the hotlines, and I'm like, it's going to be boom, 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 lots of questions coming at me. I'm like, I don't feel like doing it. I'm feeling lazy. And then I'm like, you know what? I haven't touched my little light seers in a few days. Let's go. And then after you do the reading sessions, and then you feel all reinvigorated. You feel like, okay, I got energy. I feel good. I feel ready to do more readings, even though there's no more to do right now. I feel ready though. So that's another great sign. During times of struggle, you grab for this deck. So, like an old friend, sometimes you call up an old friend and you're like, hey, what's going on? I'm feeling this. I'm struggling with that. And that good friend offers wise, kind words. If there's tough love needed, it's, nicely and gently given to us. And so that's another way of knowing you've got a great deck on your hands. You confidently interpret the card's meanings. Like, it's easy to interpret the meanings. It just makes sense to you, particularly with tarot. Sure, with Oracle and Lenormand, but particularly it's like, wow, I confidently read this deck. When I look at the image, I see the King of Wands. It just totally, and I can think of all the key phrases and the meanings associated with the King of Wands. However, you can intuitively read with this deck. Okay, I think the High Priestess came up for this one. I think so. That was one of the cards that jumped. It's like, just as the tarot card meanings, you could also intuitively read with this deck, probably pretty early on, even. Maybe for some, it's a process that you get to that point with the deck. But, you could also read with it intuitively. You have successful readings. You have folks saying, wow, that I can't believe how spot on you were. Or you read for yourself and you're like, whoa, I'm good. Like, this is a reading that really, it provided guidance on what I can do about my situation. If you do timing, if you do predictive timing, you're like, oh, wow, the timing was spot on. This is amazing. Now, obviously, all of this speaks to your gifts as a tarot reader and your knowledge as a tarot reader. Surely, the deck is just a tool that helps us. But You want an efficient tool. You don't want a dull knife, like trying to cut up, like if you're a butcher trying to cut up meat, you want a sharp knife that's going to work with you. You know what I mean? So it's the tools. The tools are important for those who do readings. The full card came up for this one. You feel like you can take risks with this deck. So what I mean by risk is maybe you didn't really use spreads before, and so now you feel like, I can probably use, go ahead and give a spread a go. You have been reading for friends, and now this deck, after using this deck probably exclusively for a while, you feel like you could take the risk of maybe starting to charge for your readings. Maybe you hadn't used your deck before for spiritual type questions. And now you feel like you can take a risk with it. So that's another telltale sign. You read the entire guidebook. Okay, so you just want to eat up this deck if you could, and that means consuming the information in the guidebook. So you read it cover to cover, and it's just easy. Sometimes, honestly, I'll be honest with you, the only kind of reading I'm getting done is through guidebooks. I know it's not really good to say, but it's the truth. Because I know we should be reading all sorts of things, but it's my truth. So but you're also not ashamed to reference the guidebook. So I have an oracle deck. I've mentioned it before. It's the it's Doreen Virtue's Butterfly Oracle of Transformation, I think. And it's just images of butterflies with great keywords. But where that deck shines is in the guidebook. It's in the guidebook. So I will let a client know beforehand, like, I'm going to probably intuitively feel called to read an excerpt from this guidebook for you. It's a short little blurb usually. It's not like totally in-depth, long meaning for each card, but I let them know, and I'm not ashamed because I know it's a really good oracle deck for certain readings, so I'm not ashamed. So it's, you read the entire guidebook, and you're also not ashamed to reference it. You also may, not need to use the guidebook at all because you just instantly fell in love with the deck. You feel committed to reading with this deck. That is a totally different energy than I have to read this deck. It's been sitting on my shelf for 6 months and I haven't touched it, but the time I opened it, I feel committed to reading with the light seers because I love the readings that I get back from it for my clients, especially. I use that deck. I don't necessarily always read for myself with. It's mostly for my client readings. So I just feel committed though. Even when new decks come into the mix, like I get a new deck, I'm still going back to that one. I'm committed. It's like a boyfriend, girlfriend. We going steady. We're going to go together. We're going to make this a thing. That kind of commitment. It's not out of obligation or I have to kind of energy. You've learned a lot from using this deck. You've learned a lot. The Hoodoo Tarot for me, the Gaian Tarot for me, I learned a lot, but particularly the Herbcrafters Tarot and the Hoodoo Tarot. And interestingly enough, they were also part of my tarot studies that I've done, decks that I featured for tarot studies. So that tells me something like, when I exclusively work with a deck amongst people for a set number of weeks, I really get to know it and I actually learn something. It gives me information. You feel creative and inspired with this deck. And that kind of speaks to also to taking risks. You feel creative and inspired. I sometimes use this for writing prompts. I do enjoy writing, and it helps me even in nonfiction topics. I feel creative in the type of videos I do for you guys, and I use my decks to inform me of what kind of content I want to create. I feel creative in the type of spreads I create for my clients because I do unique spreads for them. So I feel inspired when I use certain decks. I know I have certain decks in my collection. I might have to do a video on that, of decks that really get my creative juices flowing and going. And we mentioned this before, it feels good to use this deck as a spiritual tool. I do have tarot decks, just a few that I use for spiritual type readings. Your hunger for new decks is satiated. Now, if you're in the acquisition phase of your collection and of your collecting habits, it may be satiated for a little while and then you feel the need to get another deck again. Okay. But I've had decks where I'm like, I don't need another deck for months because I am really digging learning you and I'm really digging using you. And I don't need another deck. So that's a good telltale sign. So, can you identify some additional ways to know when you have a great deck connection? Have I covered it? Is this a comprehensive list? Can you think of others? If you can, add it to the chat or add it to the comment section later. And why is this important to know when you've got a great connection with the deck? It's going to be individual and personal. There's going to be obviously common themes. I know why it's important for me. It's important for me to know when I've got a great connection because I want to, the next time I make a purchase for a deck or the next time a deck comes into my collection, I want to be more right than wrong. It's a pain in the butt to have to deal with a deck that you just don't have a connection with and you never will. And that's the sad truth of it. And to not feel a certain kind of way about that. I want to be more right than wrong. I have limited time on my hands these days, limited energy to be searching for decks. I kind of want to know when I know. And I want to know before the deck even comes into my collection. And we talked about that earlier, before, during, or after you own a deck. I want to know, where are we at? How am I feeling about you? Do we have a connection? What's going on? And I have tools to help us toward, with that. So I'm going to pause here and see what's going on in the chat. Okay, so Vintage Moon says, yes, that would be my Dame Darcy Mermaid and my Anna Kay. They were my first indie decks. Yes, I go weeks without using my Hanson, but it's my baby. Yes, I like that. Hello, thank you for joining, Astaria Sin. Oh, I like that. Let's see. Yes, my go-to deck when I was working in a shop taught me so much. Wasn't my favorite imagery to begin with, but that ended up not being like it didn't matter, right? Yeah, and that's why I said, it's like, great images are wonderful, but depending on where you're at in your reading journey, that's usually not always what is the driving force, for me at least. I love to use so many of my decks, but if I go a week without a deck, I'm like a junkie. Oh. Without receiving a new deck. Yeah, without receiving a new deck. Okay, yeah. So that is a phenomenon. And I think those of us who have collected decks and have a larger collection can attest to that. For me personally, I did come to a point where I was like, ooh, it's probably like my other habits that I had, to be honest. After a while, with certain habits, like smoking cigarettes, I was like, this isn't satisfying anymore. Let me look at what else is going on in my life. And then when I did that, then it was like I lost interest in always feeling the need to chase the high of buying a new deck, smoking a cigarette. When will I be satisfied ever? 450 and counting. Oh, well, check out my course, because there could be a time. There could be a time or not, but You don't want the part. If you're in a part of your life where you are in acquisition mode, I want my peeps to not feel a certain icky kind of way about what they choose to do. If you choose to still collect decks and add to your collection, then understand where you are in your collecting journey, where you are in your reading journey, and then also just face it head on. This is where I'm at, and I either accept it or I change it and do something about it. I have one deck that gives me a weird tingle at the back of my neck when I use it. I only use it for personal readings for myself, usually at new moons. It's intense. Yes, that's a great one to, yeah. There are some decks that are intense, and I can only, with the Hoodoo Tarot, the Tarot study at least helped me push through using it on a daily, but typically it gets a little intense for me, and it's just something I normally would use for connecting with my ancestors, so I only use it like once a week on Sundays. That was just me. But there's some decks I'm like, I can't come to you all the time. So that is but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's not bad. It's just something to know about a particular deck connection that you have. You know, it's like that, maybe a friend that's like super heavy. You love them. They provide great wisdom to you, but you can only take so much of them. I have friends like that. I do. I have decks I love images on, but I think it's a commutation of things that help me connect, like feel of the cards, imagery, size, even as my hands are like a 4-year-old. So yeah, you have the physical. Also, that's another thing to think about, the tactile experience of connecting with the deck, right? The tactile experience. If you have small hands, obviously a large deck is going to hurt them, and you're not going to really feel great about them, and they're probably going to sit on your shelf. So you're probably the one who needs to actually be careful about size of cards. I don't like jumbo cards because, especially as a tarot deck, I can't deal with them. If I'm doing professional readings back to back, my little wrists, they hurt to try to, and I always say, they're not little hands, but it can hurt my wrist if my fingers are always spread out trying to shuffle awkwardly. So that is a consideration. Hello, Kim Moon Whisper. How are you? Kim and Kim. Good vibes. Hi, Moonchild Tarot 3. Wow, thank you. The course helped me so much. I feel so much better about my decisions now. I'm glad you said that. Thank you. I do too. I learned so much creating the course, but it was because I was going through the spreads that I have as a part of the course. The tarot spreads were ones that I did to help me to get to the other side of what I was, because some people are like, our friend Vintage Moon says, I have 450 decks and counting. When I got to about 220-ish, 220 decks, I just knew, I was like, there's something else going on in my life. I don't know what it is, but I just don't feel like I should be adding to my collection anymore. And so I did my depth year 2020. And as a part of doing my depth year 2020, that's when the course was formed, as through that process for me. And so I said, wouldn't it be cool to share it with other people? Even if they only want to do 1 or 2 lessons or whatever, to have tools for them as well, since I created tools for myself. And so that's what happened. So it makes me happy to hear that. 1 or 2,000 is good for the individual and their bank account. Yes. Oh, thank you, Marina. Good to see you. I'm glad you're here. The Thoth Tarot gives me the weird sensation on the back of my neck as well. Me too. I feel a certain way about Thoth. I'm going to be honest with you guys. And it honestly could just be that I sunk my teeth into Rider-Waite-Smith system more so than any other system. So that's probably why. But I don't know. My Sun and Moon Tarot in a 10, though, is Thoth based. And I love it to pieces. and I don't have no problems using it. But even that one, I can't use all the time. Like, and I just can't. Even though I had an awesome reading last week, I did one at a little cafe with a friend. I was doing a reading for her, and before she went back to the States. And so it was like, okay, I can use you now, but then you get to go back in your little tent, and I'll use you again when I'm ready. Yes. Oh, Myrna says, just looking at my cards takes the pictures or cards of the pictures. Okay, hold on. Let me read that again. Just looking at my cards, the pictures brings me so much joy. They just make my heart happy. And that's when you know you're a little collector at heart, right? Like, it's, I think sometimes people are like, with me, oh, well, you create this course, so you're shaming people for wanting to collect. That's not it at all. That I created the course to help celebrate collecting, but do it in a responsible and mindful way. So that way you are aware of what you're doing and aware of what's going on around you and aware of any changing circumstances that may come up. You never know what comes up. One minute you can be gainfully employed and the next you're not. Are you stacking money and saving for a rainy day? Are you, because if you are plus collecting, great. Are you paying down debts? Are you growing debts as a result of your collection? So I just want people to be responsible and mindful for themselves, but I have no judgment. I just give you the tools to figure out what it is for you specifically. And it's more tarot related. Like Deck Harlot, I shared in my community tab. She had a great video where she looked at her actual budget and applied it to Can I Afford the Deck? And I thought that was so good that to put that on my community tab, because that is a piece that I had to consider for myself, but I just give you guys like spreads and discussions and things to think about, but there's so much to it. So much. Yeah, it does seem cold. It does. And it's a lot going on. And sometimes, and that's why I'm kind of hoping that a PIP deck is the next deck for our tarot study. Because sometimes I just need a break from all the extra, all the extra imagery. I don't know. I go back and forth on that. All right, back to our presentation. Let's see, back to that. Here we go. So, how do you know when you have an unsatisfactory or meh deck connection? Like meh. How do you know? What's featured here is the Oracle of Fairies, Oracle of the Fairies. Oops. And the deck is beautiful. It's an Oracle deck. It's a Hay House deck. It's inexpensive. I got it on sale even. There were some things that I like about it. The fact that it was borderless. There was a little bit of diversity, not a lot, but that's okay. I actually like the little blurbs at the bottom, so I wouldn't have to consult the guidebook. And I was, in my mind, I was searching for a deck for my clients, like a closing little oracle message that they could read later. I usually take a picture of it for them so they could read it later. But ultimately, it was a meh connection. Now, again, if you're into fairies, it's probably a wonderful deck. But one thing I ended up learning, and as I was taking the course for myself and learning about my own personal taste, is that I don't really like fairies, to be honest. I know people really believe in them, and I'm not knocking you. I think that's perfectly fine. We all have our little belief systems, myself included, that some people are like, I don't believe in that or ascribe to that, whatever. I just not really into fairies. And so I think that caused the deck just to sit on the shelf for a while, to the point I had to sell it. That's a beautiful deck. And I'm not knocking it, and I'm not discouraging people from getting it. I really think for me, it was just the fairies deal. So think of a deck where you have a dull or meh connection to it. Do you often wonder why you were drawn to this deck in the first place? Because I know why I was drawn to it. like I mentioned before, it was borderless. It had some certain things going for it that I wanted to share with my clients. But in the end, I never reached for it. And I ended up having to sell it before I moved here. Sorry, my eyes are watering for some strange reason. Ways to know you've got a meh deck connection. So similar exercise I did with my tarot before. I asked that question for the cards. So here's what came of those shuffles and jumpers. So disappointments with aspects of the deck. Fairies for me. That was a disappointment. A little bit of lack of, like, I wanted more diversity. But then again, I was like, well, I understand that the mythology of fairies, they don't necessarily have all different cultures, although for me, it's fantasy. So you could certainly add more diversity if should you so choose, but that could be a publisher deal. I don't know. Sometimes there's other disappointments with the deck. The card stock, the size of the deck we talked about. When you got the deck, you thought it was going to, be for this type of reading, and then it just doesn't pan out. There's so many different ways that a deck can disappoint, but it could definitely cause it to sit on the shelf. Unwillingness to pick up the deck. So that kind of ties back into disappointments. You just don't want to pick up this deck. No matter how hard you try, even when you tell yourself, oh, it's been several months or a year even, and I haven't picked it up yet, and you just still don't want to pick it up. That's how you know you have a meh connection. Incoherent messages on a consistent basis. So if you're a reader and you know what I'm talking about, incoherent messages. Sometimes some cards will come out and you just really don't know, and you have to sit with the cards for a while to kind of marinate on them, or you have to journal with them. And I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is it's just literally mumbo jumbo. Like, I don't know at all what's going on here. And it's a consistent thing. I had that with the Santa Muerte deck. There was another deck that I had that with, the Chrysalis Tarot. It was just like, the messages are not coherent to me at all. It feels like it will take lots of effort to master. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I feel like learning a new system, and then sometimes I really don't. And I don't want to have, in order to access using this deck, I have to learn this whole new system. And so therefore it sits on the shelf. The fear of missing out, FOMO, has worn off, leaving an empty feeling. When I was backing decks, pre-ordering, purchasing them, just willy-nilly buying decks all the time. And then once the FOMO of it all wore off, and I saw, oh, they're doing another print run, and other people got it, and I don't know, I would have this empty feeling. I'm assuming, and I'm attributing that to probably the adrenaline rush of the search, the find, the ordering. Will it, or when you back it, will it fund? Waiting all that time for the creation of it, if it hadn't been already, like if the artwork hadn't been all completed. And then you see that other people this is a disappointment. You see other people after you backed it, the folks who pre-ordered it after you did, they slide in and get their copies first. And so then it's just like the FOMO of it all has worn off, and it leaves an empty feeling, and then the deck sits. And then it didn't live up to the hype. Overwhelmed feelings when you think of this deck. And that we've touched upon all of that. Overwhelmed feelings. Anxiety or creeping fears when using this deck. Now, this is rare. I don't even know. I think I've only have one or two decks in my entire collection that I kind of would get anxiety. Whereas we talked about feeling reinvigorated and feeling alive and ready for the next reading. That's the opposite of that, is feeling down, feeling, anxiety. Like, will this, can you trust the messages that are going to come through? It's just anxiety around it. Read intuitively with this deck. Forget about it. And that, for me, I love decks that I can intuitively read with. Yes, it's important to know the tarot guidebook meanings. Like that's the foundation, right, of reading the tarot, in my opinion. But you also got to be able to pick up on intuitive cues, have the artwork evoke something inside of you with your intuition. So if you can't do that, for me, that deck is probably going to sit on the shelf. Creative blocks when using this deck. So the opposite of feeling creative inspired is you have creative blocks. Nothing comes through creatively. You lack confidence when you use this deck. You don't feel confident at all. And in fact, you're like, if I can't feel confident, I can't really read with you. And I'm not even feeling the artwork that much. So guess what? It sits on the shelf. The love of this deck is only skin deep. And what I mean by skin deep is you're just really loving, oh, the box was wonderful. It was, it's like soft, and it's sturdy. And then the cards are beautiful. And, I'm trying to think of all the aesthetics of it all the aesthetics of the deck. But it falls flat or falls short when it's time to read with it. Maybe the cardstock is too rose petally and too thick to even really practically use in, like when we were reading in tarot shops. It's just not practical. So it's only skin deep. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with having decks in your collection that there's only a skin deep type of connection, right? That's okay. You could have that. But if you're in a place in your life where you just need the readings, like to be on point, and you need to be able to work with the cards, and then don't need to hurt our hands and wrists, then skin deep is just not going to cut it. And it may sit on the shelf because you are reading professionally, for example, and you really need decks that you can work with and grab for. Guilt surrounding this deck. And guilt can show up in many different ways, and we'll talk about that in the next slide, I believe. Yes, guilt comes from lack of use. Guilt can come from, I remember one time I had like 5 or 6 decks coming at my door. And my husband was like, what the hell? Like, what's going on here? He wasn't really judgy. I mean, I, make my own money. It's not like he can really tell me. But it was like, what's going on here? And I was like feeling kind of guilty about those last few decks that slid through. Some I was like, well, I don't care what you say. But then some I was like, I'm not even really feeling this deck. And here I am. I got them like the mailmen were meeting each other as here come the UPS over here, and here comes Amazon, and it was just, so there was guilt. There's all forms of guilt. We'll talk about that in a moment. The readings do not resonate at all with this deck. We spoke ad nauseum about that. I question whether I added this one. Bad taste in your mouth from a poor seller interaction or a poor creator interaction. It happens. Hopefully rare or not at all. I've been blessed where I've only had like one, maybe, and not even totally a terrible interaction at all. It was just like a difference of opinions on things, I guess. But some people I see have a bad taste from an inner seller or creator or third-party seller interaction, and that could affect how you feel about the deck and using it. So, guilt or anger receiving a counterfeit deck. I guess it is this slide. So, guilt or anger. Either you could feel guilty because you don't want to use the deck, because if you unwittingly purchased the deck and it was a counterfeit, you feel guilt towards using the deck because you don't want, because of the creator. You want to be respectful of the creator. Or maybe you feel guilty because you wittingly bought the deck and now you actually have a conscience and you're like, oh, I don't know about using this or showing it off, on Instagram because I feel a little guilty. Or anger because someone sold it to you and duped you. And now you're like, oh, this is a counterfeit deck. I'm pissed. I don't want to use this deck. So, can you identify some additional ways to know when you have a meh deck connection? And why is it important to know when you've got a sucky or meh connection with a deck? My husband and his sneezing. Oh my God. So yeah, why is it important? Why is that important? So let me see what's going on in the chat. Okay. Yes. Yes, it's on my website, and I'm excited, guys. For those who take it, you can download a certificate that you took it. Yay! I'm excited about it. Just looking at my cards. Okay, we saw that. That's how I am. I have tarot money in my spreadsheet, right? A budget. So that's a great way to keep you on track. It's a monthly or yearly, even an annual budget, a monthly budget for your deck spending. And it just, you feel good about it because you've looked at your entire financial picture. Sorry, guys. I'm not getting a cold. Like, you would not have gotten me sick. I think it's because for me, I have the air going, trying to stay cool for you guys and not be a sweaty mess. Oh, hold on. Let me see. I have tarot money in my spreadsheet, and sometimes there's no money there. And if I'm putting the money towards something else, like a new car. Yes, a new car is super duper spectacular. Sorry, it does. I mean, new deck, new car. Absolutely. If you're not paying others what you owe, that is a problem. Indeed. I lost my job of 9 years here in Argentina, and then I started buying so many. I had to stop. I'm still in the process of being more selective, but I understood where my urge to buy came from. Nice. And that's so true. So true. And circumstances do change, and we just have to understand when our circumstances change what's motivating us. And sometimes for me, when I was going through a lot of emotional and mental turmoil, it felt just comforting to have a deck come and unbox it for you guys. But then after a while, I was like, there was still something inside of me that just wasn't being tended to. And it turned out it was because of something greater going on in my life, which is I was burnt out from my corporate life. And then I just was burnt out, and the hole was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I could no longer, I could continue to work that job. I could continue to work that job and be unhappy and afford all the decks I wanted. Or I could maybe scale back on my deck collection and scale back on my deck purchases and actually live a life that feels more purposeful for me and more joyful. And so I had to be aware that was happening. And the death year is what kicked that off for me. I save my money to back those decks that I support their ideas. So example, the land back tarot, decolonized tarot, things like that. So you could still support by just doing the what is it? When you just give a monetary contribution, a monetary pledge. You don't need to add the deck, but you want to support. And you don't have to just do the one $10 option. You could do, I think you can buy multiple ones if you really want to support them. So you could do that. Oh, I went to a Spirit Fest this past weekend, and I love this crystal Buddha I was going to buy today. She held while I looked some more, and I turned the corner and she had a ton of tarot decks, all knockoffs. Yeah. And you know what? The truth is, some people don't care. And I'm not saying this is your peeps or your friend, or I'm not saying this, but I'm just saying other people don't even care that they're getting knockoffs. They're like, where's the knockoffs at? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just don't think I could do it, y'all. And my heart breaks for people who are unwittingly get them. That makes it because they're like, look, my integrity is this. I don't want them. I want genuine decks from my creators. So, yeah. Needless to say, I didn't buy the Buddha, but also didn't say anything. So, the lady had a bunch of counterfeit decks, and so maybe she don't know. Maybe she do. I don't know. I don't know. All right, so now we're going to go back to our little presentation. So there's three main types of meh connections. There's the crash and burn connection. Some identifiers of that are, number one, FOMO motivated. You took a leap of faith and you bought the deck. Number two, the deck was great to show off during an unboxing video and it showed promise in the social media groups at time of launch. Number three, after the first month of ownership, the deck sits on the shelf, never to be touched again. And number four, you are optimistic for a bright future, yet still no connection. The crash and burn connection. Slow burn connection. Number one, there is hope for this type of connection because with effort, time, and consistency, a strong deck relationship can form. And honestly, there could be one that forms with the crash and burn connection too, to be honest, but it's going to take more work probably. Actually, all take work. Number two, on slow and burn connection. It likely took a long time to decide to purchase this deck after watching many walkthroughs and agonizing over the purchase. This makes this type of connection harder to get over as there's a lot invested in the relationship with this deck. So, yeah, there's a lot invested. It's not just the money, but it's the time and the energy. The time even before the deck comes to your house, even when you decide to sell it later. There is a lot, people undervalue their time and energy so much in our culture, and it matters. So to me, I don't want to waste a lot of time and energy. On and off connection, that's the final three. I mean, there's many other types, but we're going to just talk about these three. Okay. Number one, things started off strong, instant connection in learning about the deck pre-purchase. So pre-purchase, you were just all up in it. You were like, I know, like, sign me up. I backed it. I pre-ordered it. I'm all over the place, social media, just getting all I can about it. Number two, the deck was used heavily within the first couple of months of owning it. Number three, after some time, the deck sat on the shelf, becoming buried behind newer decks. Now, if you were committed, it didn't matter if newer decks came into the collection because you were like, oh, me and you got a bond. We're working together. We in this together forever. Not forever. Not always forever, but you know what I mean. Number four, efforts are made to use it seasonally or quarterly or some other means to bring it back into rotation. So it becomes an on and off connection. And so those are the different types of meh connections that we're kind of contending with. They all have their opportunities, and we can talk about it in the comments after the video, right? As we ponder this, all of them, crash and burn, slow burn, on and off, they all have ways that you can contend with them, but some of them may be more difficult to get over than others. It's easy to know what to do with decks we love, but what happens to the ones we don't? So here's the thing. It seems no one wants to talk about the meh connections because it's not something many want to face, whether talking, hearing, or doing something about it. So the course, these discussions that I hold for us, this is how we begin to do something about it, starting with our own deck collection, our own decks in our, in our own space, especially as content creators. I've been in tarot tube world for like 5 years, at first kind of lurking, and then in 2017 I started my own channel. And there was like a handful of creators that I watched that one minute they're collecting all the decks, collecting, and then the next minute they're going through something and they're like, oh, I'm not collecting anymore. And it feels so abrupt to us. But in actuality, they have been going on a journey that whether they chose to show it or not. I chose to show you the full spectrum of my collecting journey. It just so happened to come out that way. You happen to see me in my high acquisition phase of adding to lots of decks. Now you're seeing me go through different changes with my collecting habits. And I like to be transparent to help others in their own personal journey. But not everyone talks about it, and not everybody wants to talk about it. It's not really glamorous to talk about the fact that we had a sucky connection. You kind of get a glimpse of that in Facebook tarot marketplaces where people are like, oh, I'm not connecting these. I don't connect with this deck anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and put it here. You kind of get a feel of it there. And, connections are very unique. We're all individuals. You might connect with Chrysalis Tarot. I don't. But it's just interesting because I don't know. I feel like there's a certain level of like heat coming from both sides, and it doesn't need to be. We're going through transformation. We just don't stay stagnant. And I don't. I see other people not. So let's talk about it lovingly, compassionately, without judgment. And let's do something about it. Tips and suggestions. Don't panic if there's not an instant connection. Sometimes your bond will happen over months or even years. Like I've explained to you, like I got the Hoodoo Tarot, I think it was the beginning of 2019. I think. I don't know, guys. All the years are blurring. And now it's 2021, almost September, and it's evolving. So don't panic. Doesn't necessarily mean it's never going to happen. It's important to give a deck space and time if the deck connection is not instant. A great connection can either be an instant thing like a new and torrid love affair, or it can be a slow simmer, taking a while for both you and the deck to warm up to one another. Commit to spending a designated amount of time each month with the deck. I find that for myself personally, I have to make a longer commitment. That's why the tarot study was so long. To say I'm going to try to commit for a couple of weeks or a month, I won't. So I like tarot studies because it holds me personally accountable to a time and energy investment into a deck. Speaking of tarot study, join a tarot study group that allows you to deep dive into working with your deck. And there are many tarot studies, mine included, where you don't have to necessarily use the spreads that we create or use the deck, the designated deck. You can bring your own deck to the tarot study, in my group at least, and use it alongside in the tarot study. Is it nice to use the designated deck because others are using it and you're bonding over it? Sure, but it's not a requirement. Now, of course, other Facebook groups might do it differently. I can't speak for them, but that's one way to connect. Try some of the tarot spreads on the following slides to help you in your collecting efforts. So, some of the spreads that I've created to help you, and they are found in the course. I'm thinking on my website, I'm just going to create a section soon in the next month or so, I'm hoping, where I just have all these different spreads I've created over the years and plop them there as a category on the website. We'll see. Deck collecting philosophy spread. So before you add to your collection, it's important to know what your deck collecting philosophy is. This is something that will evolve over time, okay? Some people, they know from the very beginning that they were just in it for monetary gain, and it never changes. But some of us, it changes as our business grows in tarot readings, or it changes as our tastes change. It changes. So this spread helps with that. Okay. And actually, I have 3 more discussion lectures I will be doing in the future. And I believe November is the one I have this one planned, where we do this together. It's going to be 2 parts. We do the spread together with our cards, or this spread, and then we actually write out a little philosophy derived from the spread. I'm excited about it. Let's go through the questions real quick. I'm trying to be mindful of time here. Number one, what is the overall energy of my current collection? Number two, how large is my collection meant to be? Number three, what does my deck collection say about me? Number four, what are some shadow aspects to my deck collection? And number five, what have or can I gain from my collection? Number six, what is my deck collecting philosophy? So you'll probably get one good card to really sum it up nicely for you. Number seven, any advice on how I can ensure I honor my deck philosophy? Guidance on how you honor your philosophy. Where are you at currently in your deck collecting habits? And number eight, what's next for my deck collection? Another one that you can explore using is called Facing My Deck Collecting Habits Shadow Spread. And this could include not just deck collecting. I collect crystals, books before. I don't really collect books now. You could insert whatever you needed to in the spread and it'll work. So it's like, what is the condition of my deck collecting habits? Number two, what am I ignoring or choosing not to see when it comes to my deck collecting habits? Some shadow there. Number three, is my collecting habits causing blocks in my life? And if so, where and how? What blocks could the collection or the collecting habits be causing? What am I doing right when it comes to deck collecting? So what am I doing right? What am I getting right here? Oh, I'm very analytical. I track them. I track my spending with it. You get some cards that speak to that. And then number five, what needs work in deck collecting habits? So where is an area of opportunity in how I collect decks? Number six, what's next for me in my deck collection? What's happening next? Deck interview spreads to help you. So I created two spreads. One for before you even add a deck to your collection, ask your homie, your best deck, not best friend, but best deck. Use this spread with it about a new deck. I've done that several times and it gave me, and I was honest with myself on what was coming up. I was objective. And the decks, when I use this spread, the decks that come through my door now are so much like more in tune with what I was hoping they would be versus just like, oh, this was the flavor of the month. Everybody was on it. Oh, I think I need that deck. And then I get it and I'm like, meh, connection. But I use this particular spread, the new to the collection interview spread, for the purpose of asking my home skillets, my ride or die tarot decks about a potential homie that's going to come into the collection. And then if you happen to make the cut and you're now here on my reading table, then I do a new deck interview spread. This spread can be utilized throughout the time you own a deck. Okay, so sometimes what you initially thought you were going to be working with the deck, like, oh, this was going to be career purpose type readings. And then over time, it just sits on the shelf and you're not using it at all. You can use this new deck interview spread to figure out maybe there's a new purpose of using you that I haven't seen before. So that's what the questions are geared towards for that. And then finally, find out if it's time to move your deck along. Are we still cool? The Tarot and Oracle deck interview spread. I love this spread because when I got rid of about 40 decks before I moved here, this was super helpful and it was instrumental. I struggled with certain decks. I didn't do it for all 40 decks, but I struggled with a few decks. It was like, ooh, should you move along? And it was time to move it along. And I was happy I did. And I have no regrets. Because one of the couple of the questions are on this one. If you go,
How will I feel about you leaving 6 months from now? And how would I feel about you 12 months from now if you go? And what's the outcome of our relationship? And when I saw that there was favorable cards about how I feel lighter, I feel like I ain't even missing you. Well, then it's time for you to go. And maybe if we're meant to be together again in the future, you will make your way back to me. So, why is any of this important? These next two slides are slides from my prior uh, lesson or lecture that I did with spiritual considerations in deck collecting. And I thought it worthy to mention them again. And remember, there's no judge or jury. It's your subconscious surrounding your deck collecting habits that matters. It's no one judging here. So we desire to be good consumers and creators, right? That's why this is important. And we can have a deck collection with integrity. And it's not just integrity to the creators or even to the planet, it's to you. Like, where are you at? Are you in integrity with the stage in your life and what your desires, your true desires are for yourself and for your collection? Oops. We can be good stewards of this earth. We can be a part of a supportive, inclusive, and culturally sensitive community. We can be. I claim it for us. Our mental, emotional, and spiritual selves will thank us later when our deck collecting habits are in alignment with our soul's highest intentions. And before we conclude, set yourself up for success. Pause before you make a purchase, please. Have a cooling off period. I talk a lot about that in the course. Whatever, have a cooling off period. Don't hit buy right away. That's my suggestion. Sleep on it. See how you feel in the next day, 2, 3, 4 days before you make that purchase. Because oftentimes that FOMO starts to dissipate. Now, if it doesn't, and you still do more research about the deck and you still really are thinking about it, do the spread I offered up here in the course, the new to the collection decks, interview spread. So give yourself some room here. Track your purchases and make lists. Whether you handwrite them, whether you keep on a spreadsheet, tracking is helpful, okay? It just is. Do your research. Do your research about your deck. So that way you're not buying super large decks. You're not buying ones with crappy card stock. You're getting a lot of information about it before it hits your door. Do your research. And do your research on your own finances too, by the way. Be sure to look up creators' social media and sites, because I know for me, I have purchased a deck that shall remain nameless that after the fact, I was disappointed to find information on their site of their belief systems that don't align with mine, and it sucked. And I didn't connect with the deck, and I ultimately sold it. If something doesn't feel right about a potential new deck, ask the decks you already own. And I gave you guys some spreads for that. And that's exactly why being a tarot reader is so cool. We can ask these types of questions to our cards. Utilize the spreads that I've mentioned and be honest, but also patient with yourself. And I will also add, be patient with others. Spiritual growth is a process and not a fly-by-night journey. So Abundant Life Tarot Academy, thanks you all. I'm going to hop over to the chat, just answer any last minute questions and comments. But I just thank you all for joining me. Be sure to check out the next 3 lecture discussions that I have coming forth. I always announce them so you won't miss it. And don't forget to like, comment, and share the video. So I'm going to head back over here and see what we've got going on here in these here chats. Oh my gosh, we got a lot going on here. Oh yes, let's see. Yes, I agree. Yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, I did a depth year 2 years ago, and it helped me realize I do not need all the decks. much more selective now. And isn't that a great place to be? I really honestly encourage people to explore doing a depth month, if that's all you can muster up, a depth 6 months, low buy year. No buy can sometimes be challenging for us, but it's not impossible. But I encourage it. It's super informative to you as a person, and it actually will help reveal big life themes for yourself, or little ones, but things that are practical that you can carry forth into your future. I feel as a business owner, she should know better. I agree. Like, we got to hold you to some kind of standard, like we we just got to, I mean, and it's sad because like some person who just doesn't even know, uh, they might be new on their collecting journey, and then they buying up all these decks like, oh, they were only like $5. And it's like, and then they realize, oh, you don't really have a genuine copy of something. You've got a counterfeit. That doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good. Yeah, that would have tainted anything they were selling for me. I wouldn't feel good either, to be honest. I'd be like, oh, thank you. I'm going to move down to the next little booth over here. Yes. Yes. So disappointing on the crash and burn. It is. I'm not going to lie. I have decks in my collection, even now to this day, that there's a crash and burn phenomenon happening with them. Sorry, I'm all nasally. I love the idea and imagery of the moon child, but just can't use. I just don't connect. I'm like, what's wrong with me? Everybody seems to love this deck. Nothing wrong with you, my dear. It's just not for you. And that happens. And that's okay. And maybe it'll change. Maybe it won't. But then the question becomes, especially if you have it, do you keep it in your collection? And how long? And so maybe these spreads that I have could help you with deciding if you should keep it or not. Hi, Simon. Thank you for joining. I'm so happy you're here. Hello, hello. Good to see you. I see it more like an oracle. Maybe it's the size. The size is cumbersome. I'm not going to lie. It's cumbersome. The Moonchild Tarot is beautiful, beautiful. But I could see it more like an oracle too. I definitely can see that. I buy or obtain if I feel drawn to it. Usually the artwork initially, then once I have it, it's whether I connect with it. I've learned now not to pass on too quickly, as sometimes it's about timing. That's right. That's right, Simon. Like, that's why I'm like, and I had to mention this, pause before you make any rash decisions. I've actually seen people too, where they're like, I sold and sometimes a very like sought after rare deck that it does not ever look again like it's going to be reprinted, and then they have regrets. We're not talking about having regrets here. We're talking about being sure and mindful as best you can be. And so I have decks that I'm still sitting on that I'm like, I still really like you. I just haven't had a chance to work with you yet. I'm not going to pass you on. But then I have some decks I'm like, I just know I need to pass you on. It's never going to happen. It's never gonna happen. You know how when you're dating someone and they went into the friend zone, and it's just the intimacy, it's never gonna move past friend zone. And it's like that. It's very superficial, not going too much deeper than that. Yes, everything is a circle, in my opinion. Cycles of change in mood, love of aesthetics, or perception of that energy, among other things. That's right. It really is. And it's nice to honor those cycles that we find ourselves in, right? I would say. And I've ended up buying back. Yes, that is a real phenomenon that happens. And I think because I have implemented these little things that I do for myself, I don't know if I bought a deck back. There is one that I might, but then I'm like, no, this is silly. Do not. And it'll surprise you guys because it's an oracle deck. It's the Wisdom of the Oracle by Colette Baron Reed. And I sold it, and now I'm like, I like it because I watch her channel. It's like TMI for you guys. I watch her channel, like where she does her little weekly forecast, and I'm like, so logically, I'm like, well, she's got the deck and she's doing the reading for you, you know, and that's how you would have probably used it anyway. So why do you need it? You don't really need it. I didn't always have the greatest readings with it. So that's the one that I was like, I kind of feel bad. And like, maybe I sold it too fast. I started a practice where every time I'm doing a multi-card pull, I use multiple decks, one card from each. Some decks, some will speak up in this context without even having to wait for a deep dive. Yeah, I am that one too. I know that there's some people who only use with one deck, or maybe they just use one oracle, one tarot. I like to layer my readings with multiple decks. So that's another thing too, and why people shouldn't poo-poo on those who have a larger collection or judge, because here's the thing, I use multiple decks during my readings, and I do professional readings, and even for my own personal readings. I might just use a couple of decks for my own personal readings, but for clients, my style is such that it's layered. So I need different decks to pick and choose from. I do know what I like, but still feel called to buy a deck that doesn't hit my aesthetic, because months later I connect to something I disliked when first purchasing. So, and you learn that about yourself. There are some decks that now I'm going to be honest. Now it really kind of has to meet my current taste and aesthetics for it to kind of make its way to me, because I have to be a little more selective, just logistically speaking, on what decks come into my home, because I live on an island. But there are some decks that, but the fairies for me, right? Like I just know, and I knew that way back when, like when I first started getting into cards, I wasn't really into the fairy notions of it all. So if I tried to go against that, and that would probably be one of my deck non-negotiables, if I tried to go against that, it's probably going to sit on the shelf. But I do have a couple of decks that I love that is totally not my aesthetic. Totally. I mean, we could talk about that all day too. Decks that I don't normally vibe with, but somehow they work. Yes. Thank you, Myrna. Thank you for joining me today, you guys. This was fun. Oh, let's see. That's good advice. With Transient Light Tarot, I set a diary reminder from 1 month to see if I was still drawn to it before buying. Ooh, that's a fantastic tip. That's a great tip. Set a reminder for yourself on your phone. See how you feel. Like, oh yeah, I forgot all about that deck. Especially if it's a deck you're going to back, right? And whether it funds or not, you're like, I'm not concerned if it funds or not. But then like maybe a couple of days before, like you can't purchase it or pre-order it or back it. And then you set the reminder and you're like, oh, how do I feel? Do I still feel like backing it? I don't think so. So, and by the way, I just saw the Transient Light Tarot yesterday on Deanne's site or Deanne's channel. And I was like, oh, this is cute. That's kind of like one of my chosen aesthetics. The decks I've been happiest with are the ones I brooded over for months or more. Me too. That's true. I mean, there were some that were, like I said, instant torrid love affair, but for the most part, that's very true for me. You are so welcome. You are welcome, welcome. Yes, I definitely have passed. So Simon says from the Hermit's Cave, yes, I definitely have passed on the never gonna happen decks. Yes, right? It's just like, let's just be real. Let's just be real with ourselves, you know? Let's just be real. So I have held you guys up for long enough today. I had every intention to keep this short-ish, but of course, you wonderful people made this fun for me. And it was just great to sit here and talk about connecting with our decks, which is always fun for me. talking about decks and collecting and getting into the little minutiae of it all it makes my heart happy. So I'm so happy you guys joined me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. And if you have any questions after the fact, drop them in the comments. I will definitely answer them. And I will see you all around. Oh, thank you, Simon. I'm so happy you're here. Yay. It was fun. Fun. I'm glad you were able to catch the live today. I'm glad all of you guys were. Much love to you all. Take good care of yourselves. See you all around. See you later. Bye.